Oh, my clock's set for Chicago.
Yeah, okay, we've got Nicholas Percoco and Josh Corman doing the Cavalry Isn't Coming.
Okay,
Go ahead.
thank you. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for coming. Thanks for joining us. So, I guess a little bit of an introduction about who we are. I'm Nick Percoco. Some of you maybe see me at different conferences and things like that. I've spoken a lot of places around the world. My day job, I run the TrustWave Spider Labs team. And also, I started a small little conference in Chicago called .con. I've seen some t-shirts even today. People may have joined us there. This is Josh.
Hey, I'm Josh Corman. In my day job, I'm Director of Security Intelligence for Akamai. But a lot of the research I do at conferences is really under my cognitive dissonance blog, and I tend to be more like the philosopher, curmudgeon, trying to question things and make things better. So in this particular case, you're going to see more of that philosopher stuff.
So, give you a little bit of background, or also give you a little insight of what this talk is all about. This is not a presentation. Things that may seem a little bit odd. This is really how we wanted this to be. It's a conversation. It's a conversation between me and Josh on this topic that we're going to talk about, and a conversation with you. So, oftentimes people get up in front of people and say, "We want this to be interactive," and then no one fucking says anything during the whole talk, right? So we want this to be interactive, but with a caveat that we only have, the clock is ticking. So if you have something to share, please do so, but understand that while we're under a time crunch, so are you. So you can't take a 40-minute rant in the middle of our talk, because then nothing really gets done.
So just a little framing. The scope of this is, I'm very concerned, and a lot of you are very concerned. And we don't really talk about our concerns, so we're going to. I want to scope this as, I want us to look at our recommendations, our suggestions, our catalysts here as in the scope of our profession. Not you as an individual brand, not you as an employee of company XYZ. We do a lot of good things, but we don't really do anything for our profession's community interests. This is to cause that conversation. The second thing I want to say is, for a lot of us, hacking started as a hobby, and when we weren't paying attention, it somehow became our profession. But more importantly, and what's really stressing me lately, perhaps the same is true for many of you, is that profession is now permeating every aspect of our personal lives. I'm a father, I just tried to buy a car. I'm very worried about my body. Now that we're depending on software in places where it is not merited, in medical devices like Jay Radcliffe's great talk and the research that others are doing, like the talk you're going to see from Charlie Miller on car hacking. The fact that you can go to Shodan and do a search for default username and passwords on control systems that affect public safety and human life. I'm not trying to sound ranty, but as a person, as a citizen, I am very concerned about my body, my mind, and my soul. For on the mind part, perhaps you haven't noticed, but there's a trend towards the criminalization of research. This should scare every single one of you. And we can either sit back and watch the criminalization of research, or we can try to be a voice of reason and credibility for our trade that adds a unique value to the public good. For soul, I think a lot of you saw my research into no anonymous and chaotic actors. I think the reason I was drawn to that is we're seeing a mashup between technology and civil liberties. And if you haven't paid attention in the last couple of months, civil liberties are losing. Part of that's because people are evil, and part of it's because people are misinformed. And we are the voice of reason and technical literacy on this stuff, and we haven't used that voice. That's the background.
So, a couple of weeks ago, I decided to do a juice cleanse. Is everybody familiar with that? You basically drink like 6 juices per day for 3 days, and not only are you starving, but you're supposed to unleash toxins from your body. Well, so one of the side effects, at least for me, of that juice cleanse I did for 3 days was very vivid dreams. So if you're familiar with, everybody here has dreams, but have you ever had those dreams where they're so vivid, and when you wake up, you're sort of confused, like, is that real, or where am I sort of in that moment? Well, I had a series of dreams in the last couple of weeks, and I'm the kind of person, when I have dreams, I don't really think too much into them as far as, is there some hidden meaning to this dream, or I really just think it's just my brain dumping, sort of the garbage disposal, just dumping information. But they actually fell into the context of what we're going to talk about here. One of the dreams that I had, basically I was sitting on a bus. I remember being sort of confused in my dream. Like, why am I on this bus? Where are we going? And there's all these people. Look, people like in the audience here, sort of on this bus, heading in a direction. And I soon realized, after looking at what people had in their hands, they had computers and different things, that we were heading to apply for software development licenses. And not licenses as far as software licenses. These were like driver's licenses to allow us to actually code. And so I thought that was really interesting. I wrote this down, took some notes. A few days after that, I actually had another dream that, and I travel quite a bit, so I walk out of my hotel room all the time. How many times do you walk out of your hotel room and you see that USA Today paper, or that, that New York Times or something sitting on your floor, on the floor outside your room? So I remember I walked out of my hotel room and I looked down and there was a headline on the paper that said Florida Man. I follow Florida Man Twitter quite often, so I think that's why it was put in there. But Florida Man is arrested for hacking tools. And I remember I remember thinking in this dream, I remember flipping open the paper and you see like a Metasploit logo, and you saw information on Nmap. We were mentioning Nmap and different things. And apparently this Florida man had hacking tools on his laptop and was arrested in Florida for possession of that. So then I had another dream, and this is the third and final in this series. And soon I started to realize these weren't dreams at all. These were nightmares that I was having. These are real nightmares grounded in reality. But the final dream that I had, I was walking down the street in Chicago, and it was about dusk, sort of like the sun is going down. And I walked down an alley and up to a door. And up to the door, I rang a bell, and there was a camera in the doorway. And then the door buzzed, just like any apartments in the city. It buzzed. I got buzzed in. And I went up a flight of stairs and walked into an apartment. And essentially, I looked around, and there was some maker bots over here. There were some computers, a lot of screens and monitors, and piles of cables in the corner. And there was guys and girls milling about, talking and social activities. And essentially, it was a hackerspace. I was busy in a hackerspace. There were some faces and things that I recognized in the Chicago community. And then, the dream sort of shifted, and the electricity went out. Sort of lights went out. All the sort of humming in the background. It was just really, really quiet. And people started wondering, oh, it was ComEd. ComEd, the electricity went out. And then it seemed like shortly after that, there was some loud banging on the doors. The doors were kicked in. And some men came in that were wearing black pants, black shirts, and came in and said, we are under arrest. And they said we are under arrest for violating some act. And I don't recall what it was, but it was some act. And they were arresting all of us. Arresting everybody that was in this hackerspace. And then it got a little darker. It became even more of a nightmare. They started zip tying us, placing us against the wall, and started having people come out. And it was a really odd situation where I could see people I knew, friends of mine, sort of lined up in the hallway, and we were sort of cuffed and zip tied. And one by one, they were leading us down the stairs. But before they were bringing us down the stairs, they took an object, it almost looked like an iPhone or a sort of bar, and they put it over the side of people's heads, and the people dropped. And then they carried the people down the stairs, and they brought us out of that hackerspace. So now these are nightmares that I was having, but they are grounded in a big reality. Obviously, my brain didn't just come up with these. These are things that we're seeing and things where we could be going as a community, and it could have very, very bad implications.
So, aside from knowing that I will now never do a juice cleanse, this isn't that far from reality. So those were the dreams, but let's punctuate this. Whether you love or hate weave, look at the weave case. Several of us in the room actually talked about, drafted, signed amicus briefs to the court, not because you were defending weave per se, because if what he did is criminalized, most of what we do is criminalized. That's not a nightmare from a juice cleanse. The very aggressive prosecution of Aaron Schwartz prior to his suicide, that's real. A lot of you guys know and respect these folks. I don't remember the name of the law, but there's a law in Texas outlawing port scanning. You cannot legally port scan in Texas, and in France and Germany, certain hacking tools have already been criminalized. So the public paranoia towards hackers, I don't know if you saw like Obama during the Snowden thing saying, I'm not going to scramble to the jets for a blah, blah, blah hacker, right? So there's a very strong concern. I mentioned this during the Building a Better Anonymous research that Jarek and I did. I am very concerned of some sort of neo-McCarthyism, right? I am not now, nor have I ever been a hacker. Or, I'm sorry that Metasploit tool was used for my job, right? So this isn't paranoia. These are actual things happening. The 3D printers and the scares over making guns. An uninformed public And powerfully uninformed people make powerfully uninformed decisions. Right? So this is very concerning, and you don't have to be hyperbolic or spread FUD. These are things that are happening right now. So often, a lot of my talks lately, partly for personal and emotional reasons, have been about hitting rock bottom. In fact, at this conference alone, there were at least 3 talks I sat in that mentioned burnout as a legitimate issue, perhaps 10 and some. We're not trying to wallow in our pity. We want to capture that there is a palpable sense of fatigue, cynicism, frustration in the community and do something about it. And I started realizing that capturing the fact that we have burnout isn't enough. It's human nature that we don't make changes. This is going to be a mouthful already. People don't change until the pain of maintaining inertia exceeds the pain of making change. So put in Alcoholics Anonymous terms, people don't change until they're sick and tired of being sick and tired. I'm there. I think a lot of you are there. The fact that several of the talks weren't even about technology here, they're about making booze or 3D sex toys or recreational drug modifications. It's almost an implicit signal that we're not feeling like we can actually make the impact we want. So there's something negative about rock bottom, but there's also something very valuable, right? Because when you know you hit rock bottom, you're free to actually be empowered to make changes. Radically uncomfortable changes. But you can experiment, because if we're going to suck, if we're going to fail, let's at least fail in new and novel ways. It's not a defeatist attitude. It says that we now have permission to try things that we otherwise wouldn't have. Okay. So what do I mean by uncomfortable experimentation? This is the part of the talk that's going to make some people upset. It probably would have made me upset, but I've come on this like soul search to the fact that we have to start holding our nose and eating our lima beans. So we're going to bring up some fairly douchey topics. Hear it out. Because basically, if you don't think these things are going to work, you think they're futile, you might be right. But you're also implicitly admitting defeat. Because in lieu of these, we aren't successful either. So I don't want to just have a comfortable experimentation. I want to have radically uncomfortable experimentation. Let me identify a few of these and remember them for future fighting when we get to the end of this. There are things that there are levers of power how other professions get shit done. Some of them are 501c3s. We are familiar with this one because the EFF is in fact a 501c3. Now they have a narrow focus and charter and they are valuable to us, but we've talked to them and they agree that they are necessary but insufficient. So there are other 501c3s that are educational or even think tank. So you can have like an Institute for Cyber Sanity, for example. We can have research fellows from the Institute for Cyber Sanity who give opinion on public policy, who score public elected officials on their cyber literacy, who create nomenclature and frameworks to present facts to the public. ThinkTheTruth.org campaign for smoking, perhaps. There are 501c4s. This is the one that's going to make you cringe. We don't have a lobby. That's what a lobby is. And how things change in this country is through lobbies. That's your value lever to influence the legislative branch. You can use think tanks, you can have position papers, but you can't directly influence elected officials without a 501c4. There are professional organizations, and no, I do not mean CISP. There are professional organizations like the American Medical Association, which embodies the voice of the profession of doctors. There is the Bar Association, which organizes, professionalizes lawyers. They have features like pro bono work, where it's encouraged and a natural part of being that, and they demonstrate their public benefit to society with pro bono work. So there's professional organizations. Probably the linchpin of all this is an integrated PR and media campaign. And this includes CNN, this includes the major news outlets. And this means, instead of letting Symantec executives bloviate about signature antivirus that doesn't work, or instead of letting a rock star, diva, narcissistic vulnerability pimp their company or their personal brand, that we actually decide who our best spokespeople are for various topics, and with a common voice and a common set of talking points, have an incredible message that my mother-in-law could understand. This might involve stupid words like cyber. It might. We're going to have to do some experimentation. That's your hearts and minds. That's where you create the permission to engage with senators, congressmen, legislative, judicial. And honestly, we're going to have to try all of them. This isn't either or. One of the people in this room wanted us to start a PAC, Political Action Committee. The reason I pushed back on that one is because you actually back candidates in a particular party, and I think if we become partisan, we're going to fail. We should focus on the things where we can all agree, such as protecting the ability to do research. Next.
So,
No one threw anything, that's a good sign.
you what?
No one threw anything,
They
that's a
did.
good sign.
No one, yeah, it's early. No alcohol to drink yet. Oh, we have a beer right there. There we go. Okay. Yeah, a whole row of beer. So you know, this it's sometimes hard as a person to realize, but you know, everything you say, do, you know, unless you're locked in a box someplace, you influence people. You know, just by walking down the street or walking around at a conference, you are making influences just by having conversation or you know, standing up here in front of you. Now, in the world we live in, especially in the hacking community, and if we're talking about changing things in policymakers' minds, the influence is sometimes masked by who we are as a community in the minds of the people who are trying to educate or people we're trying to talk to. You know, when you have a hacker that's asked to go talk to policymakers and they're sitting in the same room and the hacker's explaining how things work or explaining how the risks are to this technology that they broke, the policymakers are not seeing often that this is an expert here, this is someone who's trusted. Because of the way the media portrays our community and things that come out of our president's mouth even, where Obama said, you know, 27-year-old hacker's not going to cause us to scramble jets, they see a hacker in front of them. And there's an implicit lack of trust in many cases of that person sitting in front of them, explaining how things work. And oftentimes, so I work with my own team, and we do media. We were just talking with CNN yesterday about some things. And it's very easy for us to speak what we don't even think is very technical, and you lose people right away. And so the messages, a lot of the meaning behind those messages get lost. So when we're talking about the chain of influence, what we want to see is that you have people who love to break things. How many people here like to break stuff? A lot of people. You like to break things. Sometimes when you break things because it's fun. You break things because maybe it's a little funny that you can get something to do something differently than it was intended to. But you often, and sometimes, some of you may not really care about the fix when you break something. You know, if you just think of the things that you've broken in your life, do you often always go and call the manufacturer up and say they should fix the problem? Sometimes you like the broken issue with that product. But there could be implications that are caused by it that could have negative effects. So breakers are great, and we need them in our community. Do we need the breakers always talking to the policymakers? Maybe not.
In fact, it may be the wrong person entirely. I want to recognize some excellent work. Jay Radcliffe in the room? You stand up? So Jay, if you didn't see his awesome presentation yet from yesterday, or even the very first one he did, he's a user of insulin pump. He hacked his insulin pump yesterday with several medical devices. We need more of you. Spending not the 6
More like you.
We need people like him who, instead of researching the 700th Android malware vulnerability, which I don't give a crap about anymore. I'm on a CFP for a couple conferences. 70% of our submissions were Android malware. It was ridiculous, right? So I'm not saying it's useless. I'm saying if you have a choice between something that can affect human life and public safety, or yet another Android malware bug, not only will you differentiate yourself more, you'll actually be protecting your friends, family, and your future by ratcheting up the things. So I want to congratulate you and thank you for the work you're doing. I'm hoping people follow his lead. If you saw his presentation, it's very frustrating for him to get access to medical devices. You can sit if you want. To get access for medical devices, he encounters opposition from the medical device manufacturers. There's a chain of influence through the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration. There's some hearts and minds to cover that could be missing. Think of it like the Lockheed Martin kill chain of how we lose intellectual property. There are stages, and he's probably the absolute best person to have done the research stage. Could we team with people who have experience in industry, working with legislators, working with legal journals, to continue that, and instead of focusing on the activity of a node on that chain, could we focus on the throughput and the result? And it's actually not about succeeding. We think we're going to fail 5 or 6 times in a row. It's about fuzzing the shit out of it, right? Fail fast and iterate.
Yeah, so fuzzing the chain of influence, like Josh just said, we don't know if we're going to succeed. We don't know the perfect formula for it. But if you take the group of breakers that want to align with some industry, and then we also identify, is anybody in the room like to fix anything? We might have a couple people, right? You know, half of you like to fix things. So we take the results of the breakers, and we hand it to the fixers. We say, before we go out and make a big news story about it, let's come up with fixes as well. let's really spend our energy in trying to figure out how we prevent against these problems. But then, we also don't just go and take the breakers and the fixers and put them up on CNN. We also involve people who are outside of the hacker community possibly, but have ties with us. So maybe someone who's a CISO at an automotive manufacturer, or someone who works for a medical device manufacturer, who maybe attends these conferences, but doesn't necessarily see themselves as part of the hacker community, but more part of their own industry. And those are the people that we can work with to then get the right messages to the policymakers.
So one thing I'm going to use is a concrete example, and Jay knows way more about this than I do, but I really pressed on this for the last year. How do we get reform in the medical device field? Because you could argue the insulin pump is just one device type, and how many people have diabetes? Maybe we should focus on fixing diabetes instead of just the palliative devices. There's all sorts of arguments there, but I'm looking at this as building our strength and building our muscles and building our experience. Because if you can get precedent set at the FDA that there's a new criteria for requiring a level of care for adversarial resilience for any new medical devices, you can change all of them, right? So let me just give you an example of how sort of perverse this is. I'll try to do it in 60 seconds or less. I went to the industry and I said, how do we take things like the Barnum B. Jack research, like Jay's research, and turn it into FDA? And I met a guy named Kevin Fsck, and he's a PhD, and he works with the FDA, and he knows exactly how the system works. And I said, okay, why don't we get them to recall those devices? And he said, no, they can't do that because the FDA says I can either prevent a life-saving technology from entering the market for a theoretical attack or take a gamble on something that hasn't killed anybody yet. Okay, failure. And he accepted that answer. And I said, okay, that's great for these devices. Why don't we put something in that says by 2015, anyone who puts elective attack surface and unnecessary remote access protocols is going to be held to a higher standard of care. And that way we can approve all the stuff in the channel, blah, blah, blah. And he says, well, Josh, the SEC is concerned about raising the barriers to entry for new entrants into a high-growth market for the US economy. So they said if you raise the bar too high, you're going to suppress new entrants who have 12 or less employees. So that's an issue, but he knows those issues. Then I said, okay, well, why don't we do something where they can still get into market, they just don't have to put the Bluetooth on everything. He said, well, Josh, it's the bacon principle. It's like everything's better with bacon, everything's better with Bluetooth. So basically they're all doing it unnecessarily just because it's a competitive advantage in the marketplace. So I looked at this as, yeah, this is going to be a really hard problem. But if we push through and fail fast and iterate, we can do that thing that makes the hearts and minds campaigns of my mother-in-law and neighbors concerned over this looming sort of Damocles. We can find the senators that have insulin pumps or medical device pumps in a coordination with that. We can go to Kevin Fu and say, we appreciate your topical knowledge, you need to try harder and we will help you. And we haven't really done that coordinated, integrated campaign. And for at least one or two topics, I think it's time to try.
So another way to look at this is some sounds.
Oh yeah, you gotta do that.
So another way to think about this is basically hacking our future. We have the capabilities. We hack technology. I mean, there's dozens of talks or hundreds of talks this week about breaking different types of technical devices. And so if we can hack X, fill in X, we can hack this. So we have
you can dodge the wrench, you can dodge the ball.
So that's just I guess a little bit of an analogy there for our community. But if we can actually go and hack something, why can't we hack this? Like Josh said, let's coordinate, let's build a process, let's build a community, build think tanks around these life-benefiting technologies. It's going to benefit us and everybody else in the world, and work our way through it. We have, as far as even selling these things, we have some of the best social engineers on the planet. We do. There's social engineering exercises, there's red team engagements, there's things that go on every single day within our community, and it's not about lying to people, it's about understanding how people work and how people think in order to get an emotional response, get them to react in a certain way that drives our community's agenda. So with that, really, where do we start? Where should we start?
Yeah, one of the examples that could be cut from the slides was if if you look at how a presentation, how you jailbreak an iPhone, it's not just an off by one anymore. It's pretty convoluted. You gotta do quite a few things to escape the sandbox and do this and get privilege escalation and move laterally. And if you were to map out that architecture with a box and wire diagram, there's a similar box and wire diagram for how laws are passed. There is. And it's not nearly as reliable as an OS, but it will take some soft sciences, but we have that basic native talent. We know how to do it. And it might take a hardware hacker and a Chris Nickerson, and a Relic, and a Logan, but we can do it. We've done it elsewhere. So we're gonna frame out 3 planks of a platform here. Back to my fears for my body, my mind, and my soul. This is a straw man to be debated. I'm going to suggest to us that if we are very concerned about the criminalization of research, we don't start with our needs, we start with the public's needs. And I'm going to suggest that whatever we form, we focus very first with a concerted effort on security research that affects public safety and human life, the public good. There's a reason for this, and this will include, we can choose a scope, but my hunch is we should include life-saving medical devices, embedded OSs in automobiles, and embedded control systems directly exposed to the internet. Things that actually affect life and death.
How about the power grid?
Power grid counts, absolutely.
Yes.
We could actually prioritize it, and we'll tell you how and where we want to discuss that prioritization. Next slide. A reason to do this is if we can carve off by demonstrating a unique, I mean the definition of unique, a unique service that this demographic and community, that security research serves to the public good, we can preserve and protect a pervasive ability to do security research without criminalization. We can't just say stop oppressing us. We can't just say we want to break stuff. We have to demonstrate, first and foremost, demonstrate a unique public good to preserve and provide air cover for continued security research without criminalization. And this is a clear and present danger. And that's something for us. And for everybody, back to the other point, technology is recalibrating civil liberties, right? Most of our US-based civil liberties are based on the notion of borders. The internet has no borders, right? There's all sorts of discussions you can do on this, and if you're interested, I have prior bodies of work on this. But there are very serious threats to this, and our community has not yet engaged. So if you squint, this is essentially a plea for protecting our bodies, our minds, and our souls. And whether you're a left-brain person or a right-brain person, one of those is going to resonate with you as a security researcher here in Vegas this week, or as a citizen like my neighbor who doesn't give a crap about this kind of stuff normally. They probably would care about their public safety.
So we have some next steps. So we said at the beginning, this isn't a completed presentation as far as us giving you all the answers and all the solutions to these issues. This is the start of a conversation. So we have some ideas about what we should do from a next step perspective. And one of them is actually naming the movement. And what do we call this? We call the presentation, Cavalry isn't coming, and we have some little stickers and things that say something's on it, but we don't really know what to call this. It has to be something that resonates with people, something that's meaningful, and also it's not too complicated that it's not going to resonate with the people outside of this community.
I think we should build out this list, but just as an example, when I gave my keynote at BSidesLV San Francisco, I, for lack of a better term, called this altruist Fsck, right? I realized that while I have altruistic motives, not all of us do. Some of us are narcissistic vulnerability pimps. Some of us do it for money, for ego. And those are all good, but what we can agree on is we're concerned about the criminalization of our trade. So we want to play with several names for either the think tanks or the overall movement, but we want to have something that's both inspiring to our demographic, but also accessible and non-threatening to the public, because that's ultimately who judges our fate. All right, so hold that thought. Next.
So then we also have foreman and executive advisory boards. So this is not about Josh and I up here. This is about the idea and where we need to go. So we've been spending some time over the last week or so, the last couple of weeks, talking with people here in Vegas, but it's not just people from the security community that we need to be part of this. It's people like Kevin Liu.
Kevin Fu, yeah, Kevin Fu in industry. I learned recently that one of our best security researchers just joined an auto company, so maybe we can work through his subject matter expertise as he gets situated on how things work for that one car manufacturer. Marcia Hoffman left EFF, but she's very simpatico with this idea. There may be some ways she can help from the legal world. Andrea from UPenn and Wharton, she's a law professor. She's been very helpful. So we're kind of assembling a coalition of the willing for the various points of that kill chain. And what we want to hopefully identify is a few of you that want to take a leadership role, like a voting executive member role for one or more of these organizations. Or even if you want a lower capacity, could you maybe join our technical advisory board for one or more of these things? And this isn't just hand waving. We are going to do some things with as much help as we can get.
Even participating in some of these think tanks. We need people to participate.
Yeah, would you like to be a distinguished fellow for the Cyber Sanity Institute? HDO or CTO of Rapid 7 and distinguished fellow for the Cyber Sanity Institute. We're not kidding.
So how many people, oh, sorry, question?
Yeah, here's one. We have conflicting desires, though. So many of us are dependent on, SFA 6 background checks, and you start advocating for things, and all of a sudden you're not working.
No, that's true, and those are some of the wrinkles we have to work out. We should probably repeat some of that since it won't be on video, but yeah, there are some people with backgrounds and with clearances where participation in some of these is very verboten. In fact, one of the people who brought us one of the best ideas is completely prevented from actually publicly participating. So that's why we're going to pursue several of these. A professional organization has less restrictions than a lobby than a think tank. So in a moment we'll say we already did. So by the way, we're going to work out some of these kinks once we get subject matter experts who've actually run these before. And we're going to hold the first Hacker Constitutional Congress at DerbyCon in 8 weeks. Whether you're coming there personally or whether you want a representative from your sub-tribe, we have several tribes in our community. We might also look into seeing if Relic and the guys can actually set up some remote participation over technology. Just like the founding fathers of the country, we're not going to agree. We're going to have slightly different priorities, but we're going to bring them together and say what bubbles to the top that everybody can get behind and agree on. Guess what? We're not going to agree on elected officials and parties. We're not going to agree on disclosure reports from days of old, right? There's lots of things that divide us, and we're going to focus on the few things that as a profession unite us. Mr. Brown.
I like the first two platforms. The first two parts are good, the public good, defending security research, but the third one is just going to divide us, civil liberties. We got the feds, there's a huge storm about that, and the EFF has already got that covered.
I don't think they have.
The third one should be removed.
All right, so I'm going to repeat the comment. Likes the first two bullets of protecting body and mind, thinks that it may divide us to focus on civil liberties because of the whole NSA PRISM thing and all sorts of other things. That may be true, but I don't think it's about picking sides. I think at least the engagements I've had with the Beltway and the intelligence community were about, are there ways to preserve the mission intent that have no infringement on civil liberties? And there are technical solutions. So if we create a technical expert body to give technical opinion, we can at least remove the aspect of those debates that are a lack of technical literacy. But if we get into like political things, I think you're right. So that one, either he wants it removed, maybe we'll have a fight about that at Derby or up until Derby. Maybe we just de-scope it to something more tangible. That's an excellent point. It's one I care a lot about, though. There's tremendous threats on many sides of civil liberties, and a lot of them are because they just don't get how cyber works. And I use their word, not ours.
One thing a lot of people may not realize, but at least half of our industry are feds or are working for the feds. And that minority doesn't speak. And that's why people don't realize that it's that high percentage.
Right. All right.
So one of the other things we'll be doing is obviously holding a Hacker Constitutional Congress at DerbyCon. If we all sit in a room for 15 hours and we don't share the results with anybody outside that room, that's not going to really benefit us. So, questions?
On the Constitutional Congress, the concept to me of like some first principles we all can agree on is a big deal. Yes, I agree. There are things we're not going to agree on, and I've been amazed at in my friends, even somewhat friends, watching the response to Stoke and got some weird views on it. Incredibly different in our community, from hero whistleblower to absolute criminal they want frying, and all within our community. And we're not going to agree on that. There's first principles we can agree on. Criminalization of research is something we probably all can agree on. And instead of fighting about whether Snowden's a whistleblower or a hero, let's go make progress on decriminalizing research and agree on what those things we can agree on.
I'd like to address that just a second. You know, the Tony Awards, I think, did a great job on their nominations this year of addressing this Snowden thing, right? One of the things they said, they ended nominations on academic fails, right? And one of the things that they said, they didn't take a side one or the other. Like you said, it's a spectrum. But they did highlight something I think we all agree on. Two things. One was they said they highlighted the insider threat right there. They're like, it just shows the insider threat is a problem. People don't want to pay attention to, so they improved it right there. The other thing is it proved, we all know that the internet is owned. We've known about Echelon forever. So these are two things that didn't take a side on Snowden, whether he was a good guy, whistleblower, or he was a bad guy, right. But it definitely highlighted the aspects of that. I'd like to see more of that type of analysis on things.
Objective analysis.
Politicization of that. Right.
Yeah, in fact, let's try to recap that for the video. David was basically saying, while there's many things that could divide us, we could try to emphasize the unearthing of our first principles that we mostly could agree on. I think one of them was protecting against criminalization of research. The other comment was you liked how the Pony Awards handled the Snowden situation, which was focusing on the insider threat versus some of the other debatable or divisive points. One of my disappointments in the whole Prism Snowden debate is we seem to be having lots of public discourse and debate, but not on the topics I thought we should have, right? So we completely skipped those, and that's where analytical analysis that just breaks it down unemotionally might be something, depending on the scope we choose. To Sam's point, it might be something where we could say, look, here's an emotionally detached, apolitical analysis of what were the core issues in this particular debate, and reasonable people can disagree on these three, but these four also need discussion.
Right.
So that isn't really happening, and it's very disappointing to me as a citizen because there's pretty serious stuff that hasn't even been touched on yet in that.
So this is fantastic, but just
Not
it's adding on top of what already is the problem, right? So you're addressing another problem on top of the problem that already exists. And so the thing that I'd like to consider this be part of this being, why do we still have the same problems after 30 years? Why do we still have buffer overflows after 30 years? Why do we still have net injection? And look at how this might be able to go back and say, look, we should redesign this from the bottom and start over, not just politically, but technically.
But you can't redesign it from the bottom up without destroying the systems that already exist.
So what's the problem? Just destroy the system.
But that actually brings up a really important point, is the opposite of what you guys are suggesting is also starting to happen. The opposite. You are suggesting positive steps to take to deal with the problems and make it so that we can change the system. There are other people at this conference that I have talked to in the last 3 days that are saying, I am sick and tired of this. I'm going to go to the dark side. I'm going to start doxing politicians. I'm going to start attacking. And I think that's one of the more important things that we need to be considered. How do we also stop that from happening? How do we encourage those people back to a more positive situation?
You both said very important things that I want to repeat for the video. Okay, right.
I'm
not
watching
gonna
the
repeat all,
meter.
but I want to build off something you said. I don't have a panacea Pollyannish view of this. I do believe the part that starts to address yours is most of our public face to the world has been incumbent palliative care solution providers. They don't want to cure the cancer, they want to sell you the cancer treatment. And those, partly it's just that they don't get it because they're lazy, and partly is they have a vested interest in towing the line. So I don't want to trash people. A friend of mine was on a mainstream television show, and he was interviewed about stock. It was a great opportunity, and he completely blew it. All he did was toe the talking points of his vendor. It sucked. I was so disappointed. I'm like, oh my God, we're on a show I normally watch, and it was horrible. And it's not that he's a bad guy, it's that we didn't have our list of here's the top 3 issues for our profession, and we didn't bridge from the questions asked to the answers we should have been doing. So I think you can start to get towards your point about can we fundamentally rethink some of the bad practices we've been toying out of habit by doing that hearts and minds part and having a credible and independent voice of what's working, what's not working. The loudest voices are the ones that want the least change. So we can try this. To Martin's excellent point, one of my motivations for doing this is if we don't create positive, constructive swim lanes for people to express their frustration, they will make their own, and they are making their own. And I'm very concerned about some of those because it'll be counterproductive to our mutual goals.
And we're not talking script kiddies who are new to the system. We're talking some of our
20-year veterans.
20+ year veterans who are sick of this and ready to just.
What was our time limit?
10 minutes. It was info like burnout is contributing. You know, they're tired of this.
I want to say to this point, there's a lot of things that you bring up. I think one of the things, and I don't know, it might be on another slide here too, is that what are the things that we are going to, as obstacles to this path, right? So what are the things we're going to encounter? One of these is, you know, good guys going bad, right? Good guys just getting tired of it, going bad, whatever. Another issue might be, oh, I don't know, large industries forming consortiums and bringing legal suit against people very quickly.
Right.
Without basis, but enough to get them going. So.
Yeah, so basically we have a list of our own, but we think we're going to discover that complete list. Basically, what are the obstacles we're going to encounter? We have a pretty long list of ones from just watching what Jay's gone through, what other people have gone through. There's been really aggressive lawsuits against some of our best researchers. Some of them you've heard about, some of them you haven't. And one of the problems is we're not talking about those experiences in any sort of closed room way, so we're not teaching each other how to avoid them. So there are, in fact, best practices for how you insulate yourself. And a lot of people who properly use EFF, they go there in advance of their research to know where the landmines are buried. So I don't think we have to complete this. We have a pretty good list, and we'll probably unearth more as we get the dialogue going. We have like one more slide, then we can freely open it up. One or two, right? So if we do one thing in this conversation, again, it wasn't a presentation, it wasn't very polished, there weren't a lot of slides there, but I want to bit the flip. A lot of my favorite researchers, you know, Kaminsky, HD, all these people we know and respect, when I talk to them about these things and I tell them how concerned I am, they'll often say something like, yeah, but they'll figure it out. And it dawned on me last year, a bit flipped my brain, that the cavalry isn't coming. There are no other adults. If your fix for this is sitting to the left of you, to the right of you, or in your seat. That is really terrifying because we're not exactly the best type of demographic I would think to engage in these processes. We're fairly allergic to them. But if you think someone else is going to do it, you're wrong. It's the people here in Vegas this week. And we might team with other people, but you know, the cavalry isn't coming.
Josh, how much of this is that we talk a lot to ourselves?
Echo chamber.
Yeah.
A lot of it. One of my best mentors and friends said, Josh, why are you still in security? And I said, what do you mean? It's where you started. And he said, all the best people have already left. And I don't know if he's right or not, or if that was cynical, but his point is a lot of the people that kind of realized that we weren't going to get substantive change if we stayed within the preaching to the choir, they've become boundary spanners and joined the development community, or the DevOps community, or the government, or research think tanks. So we have seen people quietly graduate and move on, and that is a part of it. But let's not do that onesie-twosie over the course of the next 30 years. Let's get a bunch of us right now to make a decision.
So going back to the echo chamber piece, and you and I talked about this a little bit in the past, the challenge that I see about this is you're basically creating a conflicting echo chamber. So even the legal aspects and others that you talk about, people that are here this week are the ones that you necessarily need to influence, or the ones outside of that sphere. So have you thought about the fact that you could align like Center for Democracy and Technology, some of the other established groups there, and become subject matter experts to those lobbying groups, as opposed to starting a brand new lobbying group? Because there's going to be a lot of hurdles and challenges there, but you're probably looking at a very long horizon before you actually impact change in the sort of your own.
Right, so the question was, for the campus, the question basically was, why start another group instead of going and influencing the groups that already exist?
I think a success factor, to your point, will be that our initiatives that we choose to invest time in will have to spend X% of time out of the echo chamber. I think it's just obvious, but you're touching on something important. And if you look at like Chris Segoyan, he's at the ACLU. And if you look at the Citizen Lab guys up in Canada, they're doing a lot of civil rights stuff. We're teaming with some of us. I participate in some of their things. So we have little pockets of good practice. What we're really trying to do is not necessarily say that none of this has happened. We want to take it from good to better, to best, and just keep iterating. So the most important thing he said, though, I don't want to lose it, long time horizon, hell yeah, of course. This might take 5 to 10 years to see the first piece of fruit. We got to start.
Well, it's going to be a marathon. It's not a sprint.
It's a marathon.
We have to be careful. I'm going to throw another metaphor in the ocean, right?
Right.
Put it out there. But I think the other thing that goes back to is how do we present the community? Because a lot of things that you touched on, we've got brilliant people that don't show well. I mean, I hate to say that.
They don't.
You just put them in front of anybody who's outside of our sphere, and they're just going, they're going to shut down.
Yeah.
So I think the other thing is we can address the principles that are important to us, but we need outside influence on those principles to make sure that we can actually touch on a greater sphere.
Yeah, I mean, so to repeat his comments, basically, we're not going to be able to, like you said, boil the ocean, and also the showmanship of the people we tend to get the recognition or tend to get the media play, right? They don't show well to the people who we want to influence. And so I think what we talked about earlier, but basically, we do recognize we need to get the outside influencers to join us, to be part of us, so that we can send that message, and also identifying spokespeople within this group. So when there is this this funnel of research or something going in a direction, that maybe the person who actually presents it and goes on CNN to talk about it may not be the guy who found it, found the flaws, because being the guy who found the flaws is going to be counterproductive.
You'll be next, but I want to punctuate his point. Very few of us, this is just a litmus test, it's not proof positive. There are very, very, very few people in the security community who've done a TED Talk. He did a pretty good one. Some of the ones are really bad. And Charlie Miller just did an amazing car hack with Chris Fsck, and it was done on Forbes.com video. I watched it on CNN on the flight here on JetBlue. They weren't interviewed. And if they were, they wouldn't have had, I already talked to Charlie, they wouldn't have had any recommended steps for what the car manufacturer could have done. So back to that kill chain, we do think that there's some media people that he's invested in. I've invested in the Vanity Fair guys. There's some media people who know how to speak to mainstream. And in that kill chain, we can take a really good piece of research from Jay or from Charlie and find the right translator to be successful for our identified community interests. And that's going to be a controversial point because you're going to have, egos. But we want to focus on success, and we'll figure out how to balance the right normal ambassadors versus the right secondary speakers so that people get a good balance. One of the things we figured out when we shared this idea, this is awesome. Unestablished researchers, really good research, if you think about it, by accident, they're going to get a free platform as a service to get interviewed on CNN, or they get their research force back multiplied, if we do this right. So there's an advantage to centralizing some of this relationship with the public sector. So, what you next?
Yeah, so a question and a comment. The question was how do you propose on funding this kind of thing, right? And the other comment is, I keep thinking about when we talk about influencing the key people, the right people, that we really have to figure out how to figure out what is it that they care about, right? No one cares about Android hardware. No one outside of this group, right? No one cares about bugs in firmware. What they care about is, does my insulin pump work? Is my car going to kill me? Can I feed my family? Is there, am I going to get a paycheck tomorrow? So it's figuring out how do you tie all this stuff, all the technical stuff, back to those items.
You mean the funding thing is challenging. We have a couple ideas. The lobby's the most expensive one, so we may not start there, but that's on the agenda for DerbyCon. All right, I think we're out of time. We will take as many questions as you want out there, but in summary, Cavalry isn't coming. It's you or it's nobody. And the question is, if not you, then who? And if not now, then when? So, verbally, do we have any new recruits? All right, I'm not kidding around, man. If you can't participate in DerbyCon, we're going to pass around these stickers. We have a useless Twitter handle called I Am the Cavalry. But if you're at all serious about taking your own future into your own hands in a productive way and doing this experimentation, we want any and all participation. If you're a researcher specifically, please help us with the identified swim lanes that would actually demonstrate public value, public safety, instead of picking some random Android thing. But we'll fight more. Also, this was the dry run. We're going to do this at 10 a.m. track 1, keynote slot on Sunday at DEF CON, and it'll be a much bigger fight. So thank you for being our family in testing this, and thank you for your
Would you move out of the way, man? Hey! Excuse me. You guys step to the side over there. Sorry.